Good. All right. Good evening. It's 3 p.m. on Wednesday, November 20th, and this special meeting in Sandpoint City Council is now called to order in the council chambers, 1123 West Lake Street, Sandpoint, Idaho. For the record, I'm Mayor Jeremy Grimm presiding. Also present are Council President Deb Rule, Councilors Joe Spiro, Justin Dick, Kyle Schreiber, Pam Duquette, and Rick Howarth. If everyone will please stand, we'll recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As noted on the agenda, this special meeting has been called for the purpose of providing an update on the wastewater treatment plant engineering, and I will yield the floor to Construction Manager Holly Ellis in just a moment. I just want to thank the council for all being present tonight. I think you're all aware and have all toured the wastewater plant and are all knowledgeable. This is my number one priority, hopefully many of yours as well. What we've been doing for the last few months is working through the original or the most recent facility plan, 2019. If you're not familiar with the terms, don't remember, we have an activated sludge system, I believe is the technical term for it. I'll be corrected by our professionals in a minute. And it's failing in many ways. We've got Devin Hull here, who's our operator down there and just does a fabulous job keeping it running. But this plant has reached the end of its life, and we're all pretty lucky that we're not having bigger issues out there, thanks to Devin's great work. Holly's been instrumental in this. She's been coordinating, directing, working on the contract. We've had a team of folks, including Rod, our collections superintendent. Councilmember Howard stopped in on a meeting when we were working through some of this. But what we've been doing at this point is just trying to assess and really determine were the findings in our 2019 facility plan still relevant? Has anything changed? And how do we really crack this egg in terms of, do we look at incremental replacement of these bits and pieces? Do we look at a turnkey, system that can replace them all? What do we not know at this point as we start to build up to a cost estimate? And then sort of outlining the timeline and funding sources of how we could get this plant reconstructed and replaced, including meetings with the USDA, Rural Development, with Idaho DQ, regional directors and funders down there. So this is really looking at sort of cradle to grave, how do we tackle this? And including bonding when we might go out for an election, how that would all work. But the purpose today is to bring all of you up to speed. We obviously can't do this as a group project. So our team from Keller is here tonight to sort of bring you up to speed, answer any questions you have, just make sure you're aware and engaged where we're going on this and what the next steps are and what the sort of preliminary sort of direction we've taken has been. So with that, if there aren't any questions right now, I'll pause for a second. I will turn it over to Holly for the rest of the show. So go ahead, Holly. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mayor Grimm. We'll start with introductions and go over the agenda. So again, I'm Holly Ellis, construction manager with the city. Next to me is Devin Hall, our wastewater treatment plant supervisor. And then across the table is Keller. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
Yeah, I'm Dallin Stevens with Keller Associates. I am on the team that's preparing the report and have been doing the study for the treatment plan.
Kyle Meshko with Keller Associates, the project manager for the project.
I'm Jim Mullen. I'm vice president with Keller Associates, and I help out with funding and those kind of things with the project.
So this afternoon, we'll go over a background on our wastewater treatment plant, the project process in replacing wastewater treatment plants. Keller will give us an update on their work to date, and then we'll chat about our next steps. Sandpoint's wastewater treatment plant, just a little bit of background, our wastewater treatment plant discharges wastewater into the Pend Oreille River. This is under a National Pollution Discharge Elimination System called an NDPES permit. And that's what we're required to be in compliance with by the EPA. We've identified a need to replace the plant. Currently, the plant lacks capacity. The plant has capacity to biologically treat 5 million gallons. However, the plant will see rain events and where flows exceed 10. So there's a capacity need that we have. And then the other thing that we're seeing is the condition. So this wastewater treatment plant was originally constructed in the 50s. Parts of the plant are still operational and they're from the 40s. So our crews, our staff are having a really hard time operating this equipment that's deteriorating, it's undersized, and there are operational challenges. The picture on the right is a picture of the original plant. And I'd ask Devin, do you have anything to highlight or share at this point? Kind of your day to day?
So everything north of this barrel is still in use today. When was that? 57?
It could have been the 50s.
Yeah, that to give you a kind of an idea of the age of that place. Those two clarifiers, the same clarifiers we use. You can kind of see it. It's the old contact base in there, and then that lab building / primary building we still use today.
So understanding our need and where we want to get to, we do have a few goals. There are several goals outlined. I'll highlight the first 4 up there that were prioritized by Mayor Grimm. And our goals are to provide reliable, efficient wastewater treatment to the city of Sandpoint and area at the existing site. Prioritize the earliest date of operations that is consistent with reliable, high quality, cost-effective design and construction. Achieve long-term, reliable, efficient operations maintenance with design input from operators considering equipment availability, and to maintain uninterrupted service and full permit compliance with through the design of the construction phases. So understanding our need for improvements, replace plant, our goals, this is the general process that we follow. So it starts with a facility plan. So Sandpoint adopted its facility plan in 2019. We're on the next step, which is our preliminary engineering report. And these are 2 reports that Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, IDEQ, review and approve. So that's the effort that we're working on today. And this is all within per IDAPA requirements. Our next step will be to develop construction documents, turn those documents into a permitting effort, and then we go out to bid or constructing, depending on our contracting method, design, bid, build, CMGC. But that's how we turn this facility plan into a project. And that facility plan is really our guiding document and how we are moving through this process. Below, you'll notice funding efforts. That is a parallel efforts to the actual design and construction project, and it's ongoing. So it's an effort that we started in 2022 when the Sandpoint updated their rates, the wastewater sewer rates, and it's an effort that will continue through the entire process. So the scope of work that Keller is working on, and we have an update from them today, is the preliminary engineering report. You can think of this as the preliminary design, and this is all in accordance with IDAPA standards. They'll provide a couple things, preliminary cost estimates with this effort. They'll select treatment types. They'll also recommend contract, construction, phasing, how to actually implement the project. And then they'll also be supporting funding efforts. We'll be submitting a letter of interest to IDEQ. They'll support us through bond elections and other funding opportunities. So with that, I will hand it over to Keller to provide an update.
Sweet, thanks, Holly. I just want to thank everyone for being here. This is really important, and we understand everyone has a busy life and other jobs outside of this. So thank you all for being here. And Holly, thanks for the summary. That's perfect. I think everyone has a copy of this agenda in front of them, and we'll just kind of pull that up on the screen here. Just give me a minute. We'll scroll through this. So as Holly indicated, we kind of covered the background and history of the project. We've discussed where we're at right now in the project phase. Let's talk about what have we done to date since August. So we've been actively involved in doing a topographic survey. So we've gone through the whole facility and obtained survey points and elevations, which are critical in the pre-design development of these projects. Then we've reviewed hundreds of as-built drawings, record drawings of the facility plan or the improvements at the treatment plant over the last 30 or 40 years. And that information's been incorporated. So we've been able to, wrap through that topo survey task. And now we're kind of using that to develop our design drawings as we move forward. On top of that, we've also completed a draft geotechnical investigation. We've gone out on site and done boreholes to understand the soil conditions. This is really important because we all know Sandpoint struggles with soils and water, high groundwater level, and it's really important to capture that early on in this design phase to make sure that we're reflecting the cost to deal with that material on site and the construction challenges associated with that. So, as we expected, soil conditions were poor. There's going to need to be substantial structural design and foundation design to make sure that we don't have settlement issues. One of the things in our condition assessment was noted is it's very evident in a lot of the facilities that there is settlement in those facilities, whether it's buildings, concrete slabs, and whatnot throughout the site. That's a very common theme, and that has a lot to do with, one, the age of the facility, but then two, the high groundwater level, and then the overall soil condition. So one of the things that we helped go through and evaluate was, just to back up a little bit, a facility plan that was completed, that's at like a 50,000 foot level. You go through and you take kind of a high level view of where these projects and improvements are going to develop and how they're going to shape in. And then we take that and further refine that into a more detailed design that can be used to jump into your final design and development of the plans and whatnot. So with that, one of the things we looked at is, hey, how has the condition of these facilities changed since the facility plan? And then at the same time, what is our electrical, what's our structural, what's our process engineers see? And I think Dallin can chime in a little bit on here on that. But I think generally speaking, Holly, Devin have nailed it. You have a facility that many of the buildings and structures are beyond 60 years. There is some hope because some of the concrete of these structures is in generally decent shape given the age. But I think the big thing is that your facilities are approaching that expected useful life, and there needs to be a plan in place to make sure that those are appropriately accounted for replacement.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is that condition assessment is only as good as what you can see and walk around on the site. So the conditions of the interiors of basins that were not drained, we were not able to identify what those conditions are. The conditions of buried piping or other types of things like that, those conditions are somewhat unknown.
And then as far as design criteria, one of the first steps is, it's my understanding, probably many of the counselors here were not a part of that facility plan done in 2018, 2019. So in that, we got an opportunity to kind of hit a pause button and make sure we're projecting the population growth that's in line with the comp plan, and that we're incorporating that design criteria that the city is looking for. And so we kind of reevaluated some of the design criteria and updated to match the comp plan and so forth, so that it's all coordinated and we don't have different growths. We don't, it matches the city's vision and overall planning criteria. So with that being said, one of the items that has been a good discussion point, and I know the city's actively working on it, is one of the challenges historically for the city has been understanding what that peak hour flow is. We have a good understanding of the total day flow, but we just didn't have maybe quite the equipment or technology to totally log some of those peak flows. And that's something that I know we're working on getting, and that'll be an important attribute to fully understand as we go into the further stages of design and making sure we capture that worst case scenario. I wouldn't say this is necessarily abnormal. Believe it or not, it's very common for a lot of communities to not have the most by minute data. It's so it's more using our engineering judgment to develop a design criteria and flow based on standard published material and whatnot for the system. Another component to that in the facility plan, typical values were used for a lot of the loadings and for nutrients and whatnot and removals, TSS and whatnot. And we have a sampling plan that we've asked the city to obtain additional samples for so that we get the actual data that the treatment plants actually experiencing for loading coming into the plant so that our design is upfront capturing those conditions. Like I said, the facility plan, you're at a 50,000 foot elevation. It's not uncommon to use typical values and book values for this, but now in making sure that we're planning ahead and we're trying to capture that early on, we're going through the sampling process, and Devin's been collecting that on a monthly basis. So that'll be used to kind of refine that and make sure it is capturing the actual design conditions. Do you want to add anything on that? Okay, great. So any question, would it be all right if I kind of go through this agenda and then we could come back and revisit a few of these items? Does that work?
Sure.
Okay, great. So one of the first big lifts we had is we understood kind of the existing conditions. We understood the site conditions. We understood how facilities were functioning. We refined, okay, what are we planning for? What's the population? What's the flows? And once we defined all that, then we went back and we evaluated what are some other alternatives that should be looked at or considered that maybe weren't done in the facility plan that could provide value to the city. And one of them, we have 4 items there. And one of the big ones was flow equalization. As we're all aware, you've heard probably many of times, is we have a high I&I flow that comes in due to our snow and rain events, and that water makes its way into the sewer system, and then it overwhelms the treatment plant, and it becomes very difficult when you don't have a facility that can properly handle that and or treat it. And so one of the alternatives we looked at is doing a equalization basin that could route, when you have those couple times a year peak flow events, into an equalization basin to alleviate your downstream treatment processes. And we've done this in other communities throughout the state, like the city of Preston, and it was super beneficial from the aspect of not over designing your downstream treatment facilities and enabling that peak flow to be reduced. Am I making sense? Good.
Mhm.
Okay. So, and then we looked at, okay, if we didn't do that option, we were just going to upsize the facilities and disregard that. So unfortunately, we were all hoping that the flow equalization would pencil out, but by the time you actually size the equalization basin for how much of an I&I swing you have, it is a substantial facility, and it did not pencil out to actually build this facility for these couple days out of the year that we're looking at. So that was a scenario where we weighted those odds and we evaluated each one of these alternatives based on a criteria. And I don't know if I just share that really quick here. So each one of these alternatives were developed on alternative rankings, and you can kind of see there on the screen. So we had capital costs, we're at 60%, O&M costs, 10 R&R, 10 phasing flexibility, and then miscellaneous is 10% for an overall score of 100%. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean we had to make a decision based on the best scoring. It more just gave some guidance on how those alternatives were ranked against each other. So with that being said, it was selected that we are not planning on doing a equalization basin, and we will be planning for all the facilities downstream to be able to handle the peak flow. The next item was, and you want to jump on secondary treatment? And
Yeah,
primary treatment?
So secondary treatment is really the crux of your treatment plant. That's where your biological treatment occurs. In the facility plan, the technology that was identified as a potential path moving forward was it's called a biomag or a ballasted sedimentation process. And as we've been working with Holly and Devin, as Kyle mentioned, we wanted to make sure that we had evaluated other technologies to make sure that the city's goals were met, making sure we were selecting a reliable technology that was cost effective for the city. So we identified 4 technologies to compare in that secondary treatment process, including the one that was identified in the facility plan, the ballasted sedimentation process. In addition to that, we evaluated the conventional activated sludge process, which is how the plant operates. Did I just lose? Oh, okay, there I'm back. We also identified a what I would call kind of a sister technology to that ballasted sedimentation. Ballasted sedimentation uses a iron-based product to help settle out and separate solids from liquids. And there's a organic product, basically a plant-based product that achieves a similar process that we've had success with in other communities in Idaho. So we evaluated that process. And then we also evaluated a membrane bioreactor process, which the benefit there is you have a more compact footprint, which can have some benefits on the site. So between those 4 technologies, as Kyle mentioned earlier, we evaluated it based off of cost, off of phasing flexibility, off of some various miscellaneous items, such as the quality of water that was produced, the operations maintenance costs, and ultimately in that evaluation that we went through with the city selected to move forward with a conventional activated sludge, deeming that as the most favorable from a phasing standpoint, as well as from a reliable standpoint. That conventional activated sludge process is probably the most common technology for wastewater treatment in the United States. That is very reliable and robust as things come through the plant. The other options were considered and were priced out, and the benefits and drawbacks of each of those were discussed, but ultimately the decision was to move forward with the conventional activated sludge process.
You want to keep going?
Yeah, so I'll moving on to the next one, the primary treatment. One of the preliminary processes to secondary treatment, obviously, as the name alludes, primary treatment helps alleviate some of the load that has to be taken by that secondary process, which ultimately reduces the size of those process basins, similar to a flow equalization, but targeting more towards your loading that's coming into the plant. The plant currently has primary clarifiers, but again, in the light of looking at the footprints that those primary clarifiers take up on site, and how much limited site space is available there, as well as the age of those primary clarifiers, both in the mechanical equipment that was seen in those photos, as well as the concrete structures. We went through the process of comparing that to a newer technology that achieves the same level of treatment, which is a primary filter. It's a mechanical a device or mechanical component that is installed in a building at a much smaller footprint than a primary clarifier. And ultimately, in comparing that next to the primary clarifiers, it was selected to move forward in this preliminary engineering phase to consider the use of that in this treatment process. The other thing that we recommended to the city is considering a pilot test for that equipment to verify that it works for this particular installation. I think I'll pause there and let you talk about the other ones.
Yeah. And there were several different alternatives evaluated for odor control. That was one thing that kind of stood out in the facility plan. Having grown up here, I like recognize that odor is a big deal, especially during the festival and when you're out there. And, I think we took a deep dive on this and we evaluated 4 different technologies, and what was ultimately selected was photoionization, which is it gives you a lot of flexibility for odor treatment and removal. It's less maintenance, and it's just a good staple for removing odors. And there was not a ton of discussion about this in the facility plan. So I think it was a good topic to take a dive in early on. I'm just gonna scroll through here to this. Sorry if you guys are getting sick from my scrolling. So, just jumping from the slides here, it has a fairly small footprint. The operations and maintenance component, we don't want to add more work to Devin's workload already. So, that was a big component. There's less kind of management and maintenance of it. It does have a slightly higher cost than some of the other odor technologies, but I think that it makes up over the long term from not having to maintain and operate it. And one of the things that's important to note is we are doing some odor testing with this project to fully understand the odors that are being experienced, whether it's H2S or whatnot, and making sure that whatever is designed for is going to do a good job of handling those odors and is designed accordingly. That's, I think we've all driven by some of the treatment plants around here and they have odor control, but you wonder if they have odor control. So that'll be a really important component to this on that regard. And then deviations from the facility plan, I think Holly kind of alluded to this. So I think the intent here is, the city selected improvements out of the facility plan. And now you have a consultant that came in and said, okay, let's look at this from a, blank slate. What do we like? What makes the most sense? How does this correspond to the city's goals? Are we achieving that or are we not? And so in your agenda there's probably too many items there to go through today. But it gives you a summary of every kind of process element in the treatment plant. And we're not going to go through every one of these, but it notes what was planned for in the facility plan. And then the far right column is, Keller's take on our evaluation of these improvements and what's needed or different from that. So I think with that being said, do you want to jump to any of these that would be good to hit on specifically?
Yeah, I think we'll just highlight maybe 3 of these here if we can. A large majority of the facility plan, we still recommend following through with. As we alluded to earlier, that secondary treatment technology, and there's a couple of components that are tied to that. So if you were to look through that, aeration basins, MLSS feed pump station to secondary clarifiers, the secondary clarifiers are RAS pumping and the WAS pumping, and the ballasted sedimentation system, that's all lumped into that secondary treatment process. So as we talked about those alternatives and looking at the various secondary treatment processes, and the city selected to go with the conventional activated sludge system, all of those things lumped together pivot to that technology. So that is a deviation or a change from what the facility plan recommended with that ballasted sedimentation process. So we wanted to identify that as a detour from the facility plan. The other 2 that we wanted to identify with the city that was not identified in the facility plan is the headworks facility. So this is the front lines of the wastewater treatment. This is where rags, debris, all those types of things are removed from the process so that any downstream processes, pumps and pipes don't get clogged and create a headache for Devon. The facility plan did not identify having sufficient capacity for the design flows that are expected in the planning period here. Or rather, I should say, didn't provide enough redundancy in the system where if you lost a screen or if a screen was offline for maintenance, that there would still be sufficient capacity to treat those peak flows that would be coming into the plant. And so our recommendation is to ensure that there is reliability in that process by providing enough screening where you have redundancy and another unit or units that can provide capacity for all the flow. And that is in line with the requirements of IDAPA to have that redundancy. The other process that we identified as needing improvements beyond what was identified in the facility plan is your digestion process. And without getting too much into the technical weeds on this, the digestion process produces it's basically taking the solids from that have been separated from your liquid stream, and it it digests those solids in such a way that the end product is free of vectors or pathogens. It's safer to apply at a land, excuse me, on land applied crops, or in some cases, not in Sandpoint's cases, but in some cities, it can produce a biosolid that can be used as a compost for fertilizer or things like that in your garden. Generally the idea with digestion is you're producing a safer biosolid than would otherwise be produced. In order to achieve that biosolid, you need a certain number of days in the digestion process. The digestion process that's at the plant right now is very close to its capacity. And as flows continue to increase at the plant with additional population, that digestion process does not have sufficient volume to contain those solids to meet the Class B biosolid, or the level of biosolids that are needed for the city to dispose of them in the way they're disposing of them now, which is a land applied process. And so the facility plan did not identify any improvements to increase that volume or capacity of the digestion process in order to continue to meet a Class B biosolid. And our recommendation is that sufficient capacity is provided in order to meet that. Sorry, that was very technical and I apologize. I can sometimes get carried away.
No.
Exciting.
For me, it is.
Holly, do you think we captured those kind of critical ones? Devin, was there anything else that you think would be good to discuss on those deviations?
I think you captured it pretty well.
Yeah, and I guess I just add, I was at all these meetings working with everyone on these discussions, and on the, the primary treatment, one of the real challenging things was that this bioreactive membrane is a really neat technology. Do you all have this version? No. Can you just flip to the layout on the bio membrane plant, MBR plant?
Yeah.
I think it's page 13. There you go. So this one was one of the 4 technologies that we looked at as an alternative, and it's really, really amazing. Basically, the whole sewer plant is in that purple building. So when we were looking at this, obviously, once we start digging into the site and building, there's a lot of pipes and unknowns from all the patchwork and other things. So in many regards, having a compact footprint, basically a fully enclosed system on a small portion of the site meant, limited exposure to unknowns and risk and contingencies. But the problem with this technology is that you can't just get funding for a piece of it. This thing turns on and it is on and it replaces everything else. So it doesn't give us that flexibility to say, and this is another thing we discovered is working with DEQ and the rural development. The way DEQ is going to take our letter of intent, they're going to put our needs in a list across the state. They've got a pot of money and they need to figure out who they're going to fund. And they obviously don't have enough money any given year to fund everyone. So depending on the needs from other communities, if our ask for something like this is significant, they might say, well, we can't just fund Sandpoint and let everyone out to dry. So it seems strategically more appropriate to go with the traditional activated sludge plant, where we might be able to piece and parsemeal the funding for this plant over 3 years, where, 1 year we apply for funding for, the headworks and the filters, the primary filters, the next year for the digester, the next year for the clarifiers. So that was that was the primary driver from not going with this technology and keeping with the one in the facility plan. This is an amazing technology. It's just that this plant, we're looking at well over $100 million. And it's unlikely that we can probably get that kind of slug of money in 1 year. And then we're just twiddling our thumbs waiting for years until somehow we could possibly get everyone to agree that this is the project. So that's the one thing I wanted to add about the MBR technology.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Jeremy. And I think, just for the council's background, there was a lot of back and forth on this. There was a lot of discussions. I think we had 2 extra meetings. We actually even had a further discussion with DEQ on future permitting limits and stuff like that. So this decision wasn't made lightly. And I think if we, like Jeremy indicated, if we knew that funding could be secured for this improvement all at one time, I think there'd probably be a different discussion on that.
Can I ask just a
Go ahead, Graham.
clarifying question? Thanks, Jeremy, for bringing this up. But wouldn't you make the decision of which way to go then after you determine your funding source? Why are you making that decision now without knowing exactly what the DEQ or any other funding source is capable of doing? And so, but I was asking you questions about this earlier. I think this is a fantastic option only because, as Jeremy said, once we start to dig into that site, I think we're gonna be shocked at what's down there.
Yeah, great question, Rick. And I think the best way to probably answer that is at the end of the day, it scored the best all the alternatives. It incorporated the city's goals with having a reliable, familiar treatment process. And it was the probably easiest to potentially phase. So those kind of 3 critical deciding factors made that decision easier for the city to select it at that time. But I understand where you're coming from, because at the end of the day, the MBR does give you potentially an opportunity for higher level of treatment if there are more restrictive permit regulations down the road that DEQ isn't aware of that may require additional upgrades at this facility. So do you want to add to that, or?
And I'll just add, but the membrane system also gives you a lot more flexibility for future growth than the existing system. And to Devin's benefit, if I was used to driving a certain kind of car, I would want to keep that kind of car. Maybe not.
He wants a Porsche.
But when you're evaluating these systems, if you know how to run this one you could do it with your eyes closed. You probably do most of the time. I guess what I would have asked in the final decisions, if we would have gotten somebody that is operating one of these systems to come in and give us their firsthand experience, just like we've got Devin's on how to operate this one. I don't know if that might have changed things, but I think it would have been a fairer, maybe determination of really what are the risks associated with this. Because there's a ton of benefits that I see. I'm scared to death even to go phase that existing plant just because you guys are going to put a cost estimate on it, and then you're going to have a big, huge contingency for all of the things that we don't know.
We have to.
And then you go phase it over 4 or 5 years and cost escalation. We have no idea what the cost of this is going to be at the end of the day. You're going to give us your best guess. Whereas if we said we wanted to go with the membrane bioreactor system, you're going to nail the cost much more close with a lot less contingency. And so I don't know. I sat in on only one of those meetings. I wish I could have been a part of the other 2, but I'm still not in the space that I'm comfortable with moving forward with the traditional system. I get it from operation. Slam dunk. You and your team could turn a new system like that on very easily, but I really worry about all the other unknowns associated with that decision. So
Yeah, and I would just say you nailed all of those items. We went back and forth on a lot of those. I don't think I fully answered your funding question.
Yeah.
And so this is a really, really challenging problem that every community has when they go to plan for these facilities is what's the funding going to be? And I think 2 years ago, it's a completely different story than it is now. And I think what's really challenging is none of these funding agencies are really going to give you the true picture until one, DEQ gets an application in their court. And for USDA, they're going to want to see really a bond pass before they even go through that evaluation. So there's not a surefire way to say, oh, you have this much funding. And I think that's one of the big items that weighed heavily on this decision was, to Jeremy's comment, The MBR is really a kind of one-time purchase. This is the whole project has to be done this, in this one phase. Whilst the conventional activated sludge and some of these other improvements could give the city more flexibility over time. But Rick, I appreciate your comments. They're spot on. And I agree, it's really tough to understand the risk associated with any of that existing infrastructure on the site. It is going to be very challenging on that regard. Do you want to?
Yeah, the other thing I was just going to say is the other risk is, if the decision was to move forward with the MBR system and the funding never panned out, now you're multiple years behind. And the risk of having a treatment plant that can no longer treat the flows as the population grows. If it takes 3 years and you find out, hey, we're not going to get enough money for the MBR system. Okay, we just started with a conventional activated sludge system. We could have addressed the critical needs of the treatment plant with a smaller funding package. So that's another potential risk outside of the construction risks that should be considered.
Yeah, and I would just add, Councilman Howarth and the rest of the council, so this decision was made in part as well after consultation with DEQ and looking at and talking to our funding partners. Through USDA, it's going to be low interest loans and a small portion of grants. So when we look at our bonding capacity based on our rates, which are, once we implement our next rate hike, are going to be pretty high rates nationally. You look at those rates, what they're going to be, but that's only going to support a bonding amount of around $60 million. So when we start looking at $100, $110, $120 million, $130 million MBR plant, our funding partners said, boy, you're unlikely to be able to get that much grant match. We recommend that you look alternatively at a way to do this that could be phased and funded over years, a couple years, based on, I won't call them the dregs, but if DEQ gets 12 projects, they're going to want to spread that money around, fund 5 of them. We might be more successful getting one of the top 5 if it's just for our clarifiers. Yeah, it was probably the hardest decision in this whole process so far, is to determine which way to go, and really the crux of what we wanted to confirm. Do we want a turnkey, or are we going to do this over years, sort of piecemeal, incrementally? I will say that the conventional sludge is consistent with our prior facility plan. That's sort of the technology they had determined as well. Not to say that, a dual track, I guess if design and Keller's work, the funding of that were not in consideration, we could run both through the funding agencies and say, hey, this is our preference, but if you can't fund that, we'll go with this. But that's not really feasible. I mean, it would be, I imagine, many zeros to get a concurrent application in. And then finally, just a couple of things. We did look at, if we go with conventional sludge in this whole site, what are some ways we can minimize the risk for unknown pipes and hits and things like that? Looking at design build, some other different types of contracting processes. We could, do our best to minimize unknowns for us. The one thing I don't want ever to happen, it's possible we go to our funders and say, we found something we don't know. We thought we did the best job. We hired the greatest team. Unknown, we need another $6 million. Okay, you do that once and it's not fun, but if you ever had to go back and do that a second time, oh my gosh. So, through some tools that we can use in the contracting process, we can minimize our, probably pay for it, but minimize any risk that we'd have to go back and ask for more money, and we could be true to the voters and our funding partners. And then finally, the water quality. This plant can produce something called a Class A water quality, which, from what I understand, people do drink directly from the plant. And one of the things I learned is the water quality in the river is actually lower than that. So with this plant, we'd be putting a cleaner water wastewater into the water than the river is actually today, which seems, desirable, but do we really need to go to that length and to have that kind of treatment when the river itself isn't even that clean? So yeah, this was a tough, we really did grapple with what technology to use. Devin was totally open to this. This is what Dover has, basically, if you're not familiar with their facility. So yeah, that's how we sort of ended up on this one.
Did you want to add anything, Devin, to that?
Kind of.
Oh, please.
Can I
Go
kind of answer Rick's
Yeah,
question?
go ahead.
So I'm completely happy with the Ferrari. Like, if you guys have Ferrari money, I will gladly take it. My concern here is kind of what Mayor Jeremy said. We got to have that money now, and it's got to be done. I'm worried about the solids end of the plant. We're going to end up with a gorgeous water quality, and then the digester fails. And then I am the chief operator in that, explaining to the public why our $120 million plant just polluted the Pondere River and why we didn't do it right. That was my concern with conventional versus MBR.
But the risk of that, talk about the risk of that happening.
The risk of the
Polluting.
digester failing,
Yeah.
it's already failed once.
Oh, yeah. So this MBR, Rick, maybe a clarification, does not include the digester process.
Okay.
Digester, it
Is-
treats the solids and and I may be over my skis here. I think I'm getting this though. Treats the primary, secondary, and then the digester is right in the center of the screen is our digester. And one of the really interesting things we discovered in this process is the former facility plan, as was mentioned, didn't include a digester. And I want to say is that about 10 million-ish?
Upwards of 10 to 20 million.
Yeah. Which was really interesting because Devin said this thing has been on its last legs. I wonder why they didn't. And I don't know, you probably don't recall, Deb, if you were a part of that, but for whatever reason, our facility plan
Didn't have the digester.
didn't have a digester replacement in it. So
Maybe there was an assumption made that it was in there from council because we're not the experts.
yeah, right, right.
So,
Yeah, no, I don't mean to suggest fast blame or anything like that at all. So it was just another discovery which adds on to the ultimate bill of this, so.
Go ahead. Yeah, just maybe a couple notes to point out here. First off, that $120 million number is a number out of thin air right now. Those numbers have not been fully developed yet. The second note I would make there is, regardless of going with the MDR system or with the conventional activated sludge system, the need for improvements on that digestion or that solid side needs to happen regardless. And so to Devin's point, the phasing that could be done with the conventional activated sludge system helps allow some of that other funding that you could have gotten to be used on the digestion process now, whereas membrane, you're spending all of that, whether it's 120 or whatever the number is, you're spending all of it on the membrane system.
And Devin, to your point of, if we had Ferrari money, my concern is we're going to buy a Volkswagen and then pay more than for the Ferrari in the long run, right? So, which I think is, again, very, very likely given all of the risk of that site. So, and making this a 5-year project, everything's going to escalate year over year as well. So.
Rick, I do just want to add another comment here. So one of the things that's probably pretty unique with this PER is we have about 6 or 7 months to go through and develop a pre-design. And that's a very, very fast track with the size of the project and the complexity of this. So at any point, if the city felt like you made a comment to our other facilities, we have MBRs throughout the state. We've actually shared some information with some of our other facilities that have photoionization for odor control, MBRs for the city to contact them and talk through them. If there's any point you feel like we're moving too fast, we can always slow down to match what the city is looking for to make sure that you feel comfortable with the decision. And I just want to reiterate that because we are here to kind of meet your schedule that's set in our contract, but we also recognize there's a lot of decisions that have to be made and we have to keep moving. So I just want to make that comment.
Thank you.
Yeah, we certainly don't intend to try to rush you guys in the decisions, but.
Yeah, no,
certainly want-
and at the same time, we got to recognize we have a 70-plus-year-old system there too. That's,
Then one final word about parallel tracks and two different options. As we go forward with the applications to the funding agencies and including presenting the direction to the citizens of the community through public meetings, we want to be sure in the direction we're going. We don't want to have, hey, this option or this option. It makes it confusing for everybody. And so we want to come to the table with, this is our plan, this is what we're moving forward with. If we knew exactly what the funding packages would look like, the decision would be a lot easier. But the alternative that's selected, I think, gives the city more options moving forward that way. And so that's just another thing to consider, I believe.
Yeah, I'd just add to that as well. We'll have to do some public hearings for these funding requests. Take public comment, public engagement and education in the bond. Wherever we end up and wherever we are, we want to be sure that we're unified as a council. So we're not, either confusing or sending mixed signals to our funding partners. Yeah, I think the big one is looking at all those buildings, knowing that there's pipes running everywhere, buried and degrading and, that have been rerouted. We're gonna have to make sure our contracting provisions limit our risk to this.
And I'll just add to that, Counselor Howarth. I appreciate your comments on the MBR, that there are so many advantages to it with I&I, with the site. The upfront cost is really challenging, and our confidence that we'll see that funding is really low. And when you look at the state of Idaho and places that have successfully replaced their wastewater treatment plants, Nampa, for example, they had a phased approach, and they're still, I think that effort started in 2010 or around there for them. And they're just entering, I think, phase 3 of their replacement, and they replaced their plant at the existing site. So there's success stories in Idaho.
I would only then ask Keller, how do cities then that have got an MBR system, how do they then find the funding to go do that? You listed a few that you guys have helped.
Yeah, and so some of it really is dependent on the economic times, right? And, the ARPA funding that came through was unreal. I mean, it's probably something we haven't seen Jim, you could probably attest to how many times you've seen something like that.
Yeah, never.
Never. So, that was a unique time where projects of that nature, like Preston, that's over $60 million, was funded through a lot of that funding. And I think there's a couple provisions to that it is self-financed. There's a portion of that through rates. And I think one of the things that's really challenging, as Jeremy already indicated, is we're up there already, and we're balancing this, customer impact to our constituents, as well as making sure we're protecting the environment and meeting our permit as a city. So it becomes very challenging on that. Jim, do you want to add to that?
That and the costs associated with the amount of flow you have per person is pretty high here. And the cost per treatment on a per gallon basis in MBR is quite a bit higher than on a cost per treatment per gallon on the other aspects. And so you really have to drive and size those membranes such that every gallon passes through them, like we were talking earlier. And so it's a little bit of a unique situation here because the cost per treatment per gallon here per person is higher than other places because of the excess infiltration and inflow that comes into the plant.
If we were just building a 5 million gallon plant, that would be, so we have to effectively overbuild an MBR because of those high inflows. And if you're not aware, council and the public, we've been working for probably a decade or more on our I&I problem. That's why all of our roads are cut, and we've replaced sewer laterals, we've grouted manholes, we've lined sewer lines with plastic material that stops that. We've done smoke tests. We've tried to disconnect storm drains. What I've been told is most of the low hanging fruit for our I&I has been already harvested, and at this point forward, pretty diminishing return to try to reduce it further. So it's something it seems like we most effectively can deal with by having a plant that can tolerate wide swings and high flows for a couple of weeks of the year.
Mr. Mayor? may I
Go
ask?
ahead.
It might be too early for you guys to tell, but in a perfect world, assuming that our funding is met all the way out, could you theoretically walk us through what the phasing might look like with this more conventional system?
I would kind of punt a little bit to down on this, but I'd also say, since we just did our alternative selection,
Mhm.
we are just
Sure.
developing that right now. And as I indicated earlier, we just wrapped up our topographic survey, so all of that is being incorporated into the preliminary layouts and refinement of that phasing. I know we've already had some significant discussions on the phasing, but I don't want to overcommit to something until it's further vetted out, unless you want to add to it.
Yeah, I'd say the main critical components that need to be constructed first, and then other components could be phased in future projects. The main component is that secondary treatment process.
Mhm.
So those process basins and potentially new clarifiers would be needed in that first phase. Other improvements, if you look at that list, UV disinfection, headworks processes, grit removal, those are things that could be punted down the road a little bit further.
Thank you.
I'm happy to get in more detail if you want, but again, like Kyle's saying, we're a little bit early on that.
Sure.
It-
No, thank you.
And it's a really good comment. And I think with this meeting, I hope we're balancing of getting into the weeds, but not too
Mhm.
much. Our next meeting will be way more information. We'll have costs, we'll have drawings, we'll have write-ups. It'll be much more substantial in that regard and more informational on that. So we're really looking forward to that next meeting as things kind of come together. You know, right now we've been building the foundation, and now we're kind of transitioning to building the walls and the roofs, so.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead.
and maybe I'll ask this of Holly, but maybe to Justin's question, and there's a lot of variables that we don't know yet, but if we go with the conventional system, what is the general kind of time frame that we're talking about? It's not a year, it's not 3 years, it's from design.
Exactly. I think that's exactly the point, is that there's potential that there's flexibility. So if we went the scenario of the MBR, there's very little flexibility. It's 1 year, say, for construction. With the conventional, we have an opportunity to phase it and spread it out as funding allows. So we can look at our funding sources that come in, we can look at our rates and balance and navigate it that way. And how long does that phasing, how long do you push that out? I don't have the answer to that, but that's the point, is that it allows for flexibility, that we can bite it off as funding provides.
Maybe let me ask a more, so let's say we all agree we're going with the conventional. We know we have to do phase one, which are the items that you talked about. From today to the time you got phase one done is how many years through design, funding, construction? What's the best case scenario? 3, 4, 5 years?
Yes. So actually, I can take a
But
step
yeah,
if you
or
want,
please jump in.
if you don't mind.
Please.
Yeah, so one of the things we did actually just about a month ago is we thought it'd be really valuable to jump way ahead and say try to answer exactly what you're asking, and say, okay, if we're to develop this project, when does design start? When do we, if we go through alternative delivery method, when do we bring a contractor on? When do we start procuring, parts and equipment and manufacturing? When do we go to bid? What's the DEQ review time?
Yeah.
And we actually took a really rough draft stab at that based on where we're at today. And that'll be much further refined as we develop the projects. But I think we had let me just zoom in here.
Be able to see this.
No, I know, I don't have it on this laptop here, but let me see here. I think we showed approximately So from final design, if that was to start the summer of next year, to bidding or to construction, that would approximately take about 1.5 to 2 years. And
To the start of
to
construction.
the start of construction, and then we show construction being approximately 30 months. So
For a
if
phase.
for implementing the project as is. Now, keep in mind, this is very, very high level. This is
Yeah.
going to be scrutinized much more, and it'll be dependent on funding and how these projects shake out. But we did that in an effort to say, hey, if we're trying to get this done by a certain time period, what decisions need to start coming into form? When do we have to have, contracts done by? When are we looking to get DEQ's approval and whatnot? So we showed that project being wrapped up by, in the fall of 29.
And the one thing I might highlight there is that schedule depends on the project delivery method, right? As Holly mentioned at the
Yeah.
start, there's a couple different ways you can deliver that project, and maybe you can mention what you assumed in the schedule for the
Correct,
project
yeah.
delivery.
Great comment. So this just assumed that a traditional design bid build. So in our experience, there's other alternative delivery methods that may expedite that process and reduce that overall schedule. And that is a component of our PER that we'll get into and further evaluate with the city on what options makes the most sense with the city's goals in mind.
Yeah, that, I was just looking for that
Yeah.
very, and I know it's very, very rough, but thank
No,
you.
it's a great question. Does that answer?
It does.
Okay.
Yep.
And I guess one of the other things that I'm assuming at this point is when we do our letter of intent interest to DEQ, we'll go for all of these components and hopefully word it in a way where we paint a picture to DEQ. We need to replace all the elements of this plan. If you have the money, let's do it all as much as possible, as soon as possible. If you have constraints on where you want to allocate the state money, we'll start with, this priority, this second priority. Maybe we get A and B done in the first slug, and they say, come back next year for, D, E, and F. So I think there's a little bit of, nationally, we're in a period of transition right now with a new president, and we don't know what funding levels are going to be and how Congress is going to work on funding all sorts of programs, what money's going to be available at the state. So yeah, it's not 3 years ago when the state was literally throwing up money, hundreds of millions of dollars. So you go to war with the army you have, as they say, right?
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, along those same lines, maybe yourself or Holly could speak to, could you refresh my memory here on how the DEQ application works and what the time frame is if we are accepted, what happens if we're not accepted?
Yeah, I have a high level understanding, which is this January, we do our letter of interest. They collect those across the state by region, they rank them, they review them, they then make a determination at the state level, which funding projects are going to be supported this year, based on need, criticality, all sorts of things. We get some sort of notice concurrently. We're thinking this spring. One of the things we didn't discuss at length is we've identified and are engaging with bond counsel. We're thinking once we get the number, we then go out to the voters this spring for bonding, whatever our rates would support, the maximum debt service. Once we get that confirmation, then our funding partners come in and say, okay, what do you need to make this work? And we wrap up our whole funding package for it. We'll take short-term, basically construction loans, almost like a house. Then the state will come back and backfill with permanent financing, low interest 40-year USDA or the state 40-year funding. If the bond election fails, we then, I think you're all aware, we have the ability to go to the courts and judicial confirmation for our necessary expenditure. But we prefer not to go that route. Obviously want to educate and ask and get the support of the voters first. So, yeah, once the funding looks like it's going, I imagine we determine our contracting delivery method and get cranking on design, bid, build, all that good stuff.
I might add, Mayor, on the funding from DEQ, we should know in about June whether or not the city's successful from DEQ. If the bond election passes in May, we'll turn around right after that and submit an application to rural development as well. They're usually pretty quick with their response, and we'll probably know within June or July timeframe from rural development what their funding package looks like. So probably midsummer, we'll have a really good idea on funding packages and how much and scheduling and all those kind of things to be able to move forward on the next steps.
And just to put a bookend on it, the assumption we can go for our May bond election, that's aggressive. It's going to be determined to some degree what our bond council can handle and how quickly they can move. With that, what other questions does the council have? Go ahead, council.
Well, I just had a request that, unless I missed something, I would have loved to have had this PowerPoint ahead of time so that I could go through it and sort of process and have questions to ask that are more,
Yeah.
Spot on.
well, just give me the information that I'm seeking. I concur with Counselor Howrath. He asked many of the questions I was going to ask about some of the different technologies. But I guess I would request in the future that I have a little bit more to work with instead of coming to the meeting sort of blind, not knowing how much was going on behind the scenes. So I feel like I'm a better advocate for the public when I can ask questions from more information. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And to that point, as we move it forward here, we will be reconvening a committee, a steering committee on the design elements and the sticky wickets like they did in the past. So that will be a formal committee that's meeting. We're just trying to, at this point, vet the existing facility plan and confirm the assumptions to move forward. But yes, we will be doing that. And I hear you there and apologize. We've been moving as fast as we can on this because the clock is ticking.
Can we have access to this?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And certainly, I'm sure there's a way we can filter questions to Keller. If you have any questions you have. I want you to be 100% all your questions answered. I want you to do a mind meld right now. It's taken me a few months to, but yeah, anything, if it's meeting with me, Holly, Devin, Keller on the side, whatever it takes. I want you to be 1000% up to speed, educated, and feeling good about the direction we're moving.
Right. A lot of this is familiar to me because I spent so much time with it previously, but I'm sure that for some of the other counselors, it might not be quite in the forefront of understanding it. So
I would like to know more.
Yeah.
To be able to
Yeah,
share.
we can
For sure.
arrange a meeting that works with your schedule.
Mr. Mayor, the intent was for this to be informative and just informational. Our next update is in December or early January. If it feels like that's too far out, we could schedule this in the interim as well. If you wanted another update sooner.
Yeah, at this point, though, if there's, again, we're meeting 2 times a week frequently. So if you want to be involved in that or come sit in or participate, please let me know. I did invite Councilman Howarth in on one because of his vast construction and project experience. But it's moving pretty fast because you've seen the timelines, and my goal is to put this in a place where it can't be undone in 3 years and 1 month and 10 days if I'm no longer here after that. So,
When are those meetings?
generally Tuesdays and Thursdays.
When? Tuesdays.
I'd have to look at my calendar. My world is a whirlwind right now, but I don't recollect at the moment. Usually Thursday, I think Thursday middays or mornings and Tuesday mornings.
Okay, well, I would need more specific than that.
I can get to that.
Whenever you can.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess to put a bow on it though, this intent was to let you know that the big thing that's happened is we've gone through all the components. We've selected a technology for Keller to start designing towards, based on some criteria and ranking. And we've met with our partners, informed them, and we have a pretty good, very solid understanding of what the dates and tasks and elements are in order to move forward.
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Councilman Driver.
Yeah, I've got some questions about the peak flow. So in the current conditions at the beginning of the presentation, I believe it said upwards of 10 MGD during like rain on snow events, something like that, extreme conditions. And then I believe somewhere I saw 14 MGD. That's what we're going to design to. So outside of those extreme conditions, what would be a normal average flow?
About 3.5 million gallons a day.
Okay, so 2/3 of our peak flow is probably not from human driven causes, but from atmospheric or meteorological causes.
So maybe if I can just expand on that a bit, and again, I apologize for getting into the weeds too much. Throughout the course of the day, you have a diurnal flow.
Mhm.
And over the course of that day, the average flow might be 3.5 million gallons a day. But human driven, excluding any infiltration or things like that, people are going to flush toilets or take showers more at one point of the day than other parts of the day.
Sure.
So that peak hour flow, that definition is tied both to I&I and to human use of water. And so 3.3 is the average over the day, but you might see a peak flow not associated with I&I that could be up to 6 or 7 MGD.
Okay. And so even still, it's maybe half of that extreme condition flow is something meteorologically driven and not because of users.
Yeah, I don't know what the exact number is, but there's certainly a large portion that is attributable to inflow and infiltration into the system.
Okay, so certainly we want this plant to last decades into the future, and so we want to add additional capacity. But we probably don't expect the meteorological conditions to change in conjunction with growth.
Yeah,
like
that came up.
population growth.
That came up. The I&I, there was a question of what should our assumptions be moving forward on I&I? And the assumption was, we will achieve further reduction. We don't know what that's going to be, because we do continue to do sewer lining and grouting of manholes and things like that.
And even stormwater might affect it.
Yeah, but we didn't perceive that it would drastically improve at this
Sure,
point.
but it's not going to get worse
Right,
as
and
our
same,
population increases.
Exactly, yeah.
So what I'm saying is that the 4 MGD that we're planning for above what our peak flow is now, we're expecting that to be entirely population driven, right?
And industry, yeah. Yep.
So if we're only looking at, 5 or 6 MGD now, that's like doubling. We're expecting it to almost double.
Over the life of this plant, yeah, I
It
think roughly.
might also indicate, the population is projected to be just a little under 10,000 now, and we're anticipating it to be 16,000. So you have a pretty sizable increase on population. So a lot of that's tied to that.
Sure. And then I had another question about the flow equalization basin. Was there any talk of putting it off-site? I know there's not a lot of room at the site, but we have pump stations all over town. So just curious if there was others.
There was talk of it. I was thinking of using Ella at one point. I said, can't we just build a tank under Ella? But it came to be some of the cost of building a tank or offsetting that, the scale of that in terms of the cost to stop an extra, 6 million gallons a day. Look prohibitively expensive. But one of the other things correct me if I'm wrong, Devin, but we don't have we will now, because we're putting SCADA in as we speak to all of our lift stations. We don't have great information on those lift stations and the flowage. We have information, but it's not like a log and Excel sheet saying, oh, look, it's pumping here now. So to answer your question, yes, we looked close by offsite, but not system-wide.
Sure.
And Mayor, if I may just mention, the site footprints certainly were constraining with that equalization basin, and that was a consideration as to whether or not to include that as part of the design. But the bigger factor of that equalization not being practical was the cost of the infrastructure. I mean, the infrastructure was probably, depending if you're doing a circular or rectangular tank, it was going to be, a circular tank might be 80-foot diameter and 30 feet deep. So it's a very significant amount of concrete or steel or something like that that added to the cost that was not sufficiently offset by the reduction of other processes from reducing those flows.
Thanks.
And then I learned that when it hits basically a big swimming pool, dirty swimming pool, the solids flocculate down. And then you have to add other equipment to stir it up so it can continue to pass. So it wasn't as simple as I had hoped.
And we can't predict weather, of course, how
No.
much rain in the future.
Or drought.
Yeah.
We do know that our soils probably won't change in the next 50 years.
Might get worse.
They're tight, they're clay, our pipes sit in them, and water finds the lowest path to the ocean. What else? We got some time here. These guys are on contracts, you don't have to worry about hourly.
Just feedback for us, level of detail and information. Did we feel like we did a good job for that, Deb? I know you wanted more information before. We'll get you that next time. Sorry about that. As far as like summary, were we explaining stuff?
Mr. Mayor, if I might.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you did a good job with what you explained. It looks like you made a really nice PowerPoint, so I was a little disappointed that you just scrolled through it really fast and stopped by
I'm sorry.
and didn't maybe scroll through as you were talking. I think
Sure.
it might be understandable to all of us really, if you kind of went along with it.
Absolutely.
We like pictures.
And in our defense as a group, that was over a 2-hour meeting just to go one PowerPoint. And so with the time that we had today, there was, we didn't think we could go through that in a tactful manner that was fitting to where the project update went, but we're happy to modify or adapt for the next time. Yeah, provide that. So,
Yeah, and just to Kyle's question, we're not asking for a pat on our shoulders. It's just that some city councils want more technical details. And if you don't stop me, I get carried away and I will go way too far into the details if you guys don't stop me. So I think that was the intent of his question, is we want to make sure that you guys feel like you have enough information from the work we've done.
Thank you for being considerate.
Could you go to page 6, just on your PowerPoint, just so that, and maybe 7 too, so they can see.
Mr. Mayor, if I might make a comment. I guess, if I had just a minute to process what you just said, I'd rather sit through a 2-hour PowerPoint. This is a $100 million decision the council is going to have to make. And so I'll just say it out loud. I've suffered up here through many, many hours of presentations, but this one, although the topic might not be exciting to everyone, is a super important decision we have to make. So I'd rather have too much data and sit here longer than not have enough and be questioned for what decisions I made.
understood. Appreciate that.
Do you have that just so they can
Oh,
see
sorry.
page 5, 6, and 7? Just, it might be interesting. We have a couple more minutes here. So that's your, I'm not sure if those are aerators or secondary, but
This is Lewiston's wastewater treatment plant, by the way.
Lewiston
Lewiston, Idaho, yeah.
looks a little different than ours.
They don't have odor activation. No, I'm just kidding.
That's a different industry that's producing that.
I was gonna say, whatever odors they have easily get masked over.
Yeah, no need for it there, huh?
And then the next page kind of shows the general, very high level layout of sort of what that might look like on the site.
Yeah, I'll just make a note that that still shows new primary clarifiers instead of the primary filters that we mentioned earlier. Yeah, but which we hadn't made the decision at that point, so that's why this shows it in this way.
Mr. Mayor,
Mhm.
is it going to be the same footprint that we've got out there now, the same area, or is it going to expand?
Yeah, we talked about keeping it within the fence line. At one point, we did explore going over towards the basketball courts and with this attenuation tank, maybe covering it with a pickleball court, but we came back and, yeah, not to encroach on the arboretum, keeping it within the fence.
I will note that the site does get tighter, right? Because you are trying to process more flow now on the same footprint. So by nature, those, for example, those secondary clarifiers, those two large purple circles, there's two smaller gray circles lower on the bottom of that page. Those are increases needed to handle the flow. So the site definitely gets tighter, less parking for Devon.
Mhm.
That's
Trying to keep it in operation as
the
you
water
build stuff
side.
too.
Right.
Also creates the need to place things in certain areas and stuff like that as well.
I might also add to one of the tasks that we have for the PER is to look at the build out of the plant to understand, okay, this is for 20 years. That's our planning criteria. What's it look like at 40? You know, where's the room? Where isn't there? So that kind of helps big picture wise, make sure that we're making decisions that we're not scratching our head 20 years from now going, that wasn't really in the best location for that future expansion.
Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna get down in the weeds really quick, though. Hoping to still have a lot of the vegetative screen that is on Ella to stay in place, and looking forward to maybe a true educational path between the water and the treatment plant with screening and education and such, because
Yeah.
tons of people walk that. And if we can teach them what we're doing and why we're doing it and how to keep the water cleaner, I think that's an important part of just being a good community member.
For sure. We did talk about the pathway and sort of the view of the facility, trying to definitely maintaining the pathway and enhancing it wherever we can. All funding related. We'll just see what the funders are supportive of, what they're.
Really hoping for a drinking fountain right there in the center of the pathway. I think it makes a good point, you know?
And just to add to that, we do have that as a specific task for this, even though it isn't traditionally in a PER, and we will go through that evaluation and kind of develop some thoughts and costs associated with that. And we, appreciate your input on that and helping refine how that actually looks. So
Pictures.
pictures, that's right. Yeah.
Samples,
Yeah.
take home samples.
Got one,
Kids will love it.
got one in my house. Council, if there are no other questions, just want to, again, thank you for taking your afternoon here to sit in on this, and any information you want, we'll get this PowerPoint out to you, and we're available to answer all your questions that you have, and questions are good, so let's get them all answered. With that, we will now adjourn, and we will reconvene at 5:30 for our regular meeting. Meantime, with no further business on the agenda, the meeting is adjourned at 4:29 p.m.